American Indian Wars is a name used in the United States to describe a series of conflicts between American settlers or the federal government and the native peoples of North America before and after the American Revolutionary War. The wars resulted from the arrival of European colonizers who continuously sought to expand their territory, pushing the indigenous population westwards. The wars were spurred by ideology such as Manifest Destiny, which held that the United States was destined to expand from coast to coast on the American continent, and which resulted in the policy of Indian removal, by which indigenous people were removed from the areas where Europeans were settling, either forcefully or by means of voluntary change of territory through treaties. For the American rebels, the American Revolutionary War was essentially two parallel wars. While the war in the East was a struggle against British rule, the war in the West was an Indian war. The newly proclaimed United States competed with the British for control of the territory of Native American nations east of the Mississippi River. The colonial interest in westward colonization, as opposed to the British policy of maintaining peace by designated areas reserved to Native Americans west of the Appalachians following the end of the 7 Years' War, was one cause of the Revolution. Most Native Americans who joined this struggle sided with the British, hoping to use the war to reduce settlement and expansion onto their land. The Revolutionary War was the most extensive and destructive Indian war in United States history. These frontier conflicts were almost non-stop, beginning with Cherokee involvement in the American Revolutionary War and continuing through late 1794. The so-called Chickamauga Cherokee, later called Lower Cherokee, was at first from the Overhill towns and later from the lower towns, valley towns and middle towns who followed the war leader dragging canoes southwest. First to the Chickamauga area, then to the 5 lower towns. There they were joined by groups of Muskogee, white Tories, runaway slaves, and renegade Chickasaw, as well as by more than 100 Shawnee, in exchange for whom 100 Chickamauga Cherokee warriors migrated north, along with another 70 a few years later. The primary objects of attack were the colonies along the Watauga, Hudson, and Nollique rivers, and in Carter's Valley in upper East Tennessee, as well as the settlements along the Cumberland River, beginning with Fort Nashboro in 1780, even into Kentucky, plus against the colonies, later states, of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The scope of attacks by the Chickamauga Cherokee and their allies ranged from quick raids by small war parties of a handful of warriors to large campaigns by 400 or 500, and once over 1,000 warriors. The upper Muskogee, under Dragging Canoe's close ally, Alexander McGillivray, frequently joined their campaigns as well as operated separately, and the settlements on the Cumberland came under attack from the Chickasaw, Shawnee from the north, and Delaware. Campaigns by Dragging Canoe and his successor, John Watts, were frequently conducted in conjunction with campaigns in the Northwest. The response by the colonists were usually attacks in which Cherokee towns and peaceful areas were completely destroyed, though usually without great loss on life either side. The wars continued until the Treaty of Tellico Blockhouse in November 1794.
General St. Clair's defeat was the most severe loss ever inflicted upon an American army by Native Americans. The Americans attempted to negotiate a settlement, but Blue Jacket and the Shawnee-led Confederacy insisted on a boundary line that the Americans found unacceptable. And so a new expedition led by General Anthony Wayne was dispatched. Wayne's army defeated the Indian Confederacy at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794. The Indians had hoped for British assistance. When that was not forthcoming, the indigenous people were compelled to sign the Treaty of Greenville in 1795, which ceded modern-day Ohio and part of Indiana to the United States.
In 1787, the Northwest Ordinance officially organized the Northwest Territory for white settlement. American settlers began pouring into the region. A violence erupted as indigenous tribes resisted this encroachment, and so the administration of President George Washington sent armed expeditions into the area to suppress native residents. However, in the Northwest Indian War, a Payne tribal confederacy led by Blue Jacket, Little Turtle, Bacongalis, and Inguasha crushed armies led by generals Josh Harmer and Arthur Sioux Clair.
The United States continued to gain title to Native American land after the Treaty of Greenville at a rate that created alarm in Indian communities. In 1800, William Henry Harrison became governor of the Indiana Territory, and under the direction of President Thomas Jefferson, pursued an aggressive policy of obtaining titles in Indian lands. Two Shawnee brothers, Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa, organized Tecumseh's War, another pan-tribal resistance to American expansion.
While Tecumseh was in the South attempting to recruit allies among the Creeks, Cherokees, and Choctaws, Harrison marched against the Indian Confederacy, defeating Tecumseh and his followers at the Battle of Tippecanoe in 1811. The Americans hoped that the victory would end the militant resistance, but Tecumseh instead chose to ally openly with the British, who were soon at war with the Americans in the War of 1812. American settlers began to push into Florida, which was now an American territory and had some of the most fertile lands in the nation. Some scholars have noted that covetousness, racism, and claims of self-defense against Indian raids, real or imagined, became the order of the day in the 1820s and played a major part in the settlers' determination to rid Florida of Indians once and for all. To result was clashes between white settlers and the Native Americans already residing there. Andrew Jackson sought to alleviate this problem by signing the Indian Removal Act, which stipulated forced relocation of Native Americans out of Florida. The Seminoles, led by such powerful leaders as Arapaca, Micomini, and Osceola, had little or no intention of leaving their essential homelands and quickly retaliated against settler theft, encroachment, and attacks on their camps. This led to what is known as Second Seminole War, the longest and most costly war ever waged against Indians.